This is the lesson for 13-5, day 1. What we're doing today, I'm actually splitting 13-5, day 1 into 2 days, all right? Today, all that we're doing are the rectangles and the squares. Tomorrow's lesson will be with the parabolas. So what you're going to do today is you're going to use quadratics to model and solve the problems described in word problems. What you're going to get today is something called extraneous roots or solutions. That means ones that don't make any sense, all right? You're going to end up with, for example, negative answers that don't make any sense. For example, it's snowing out today. If I said, what was the measured snowfall today? Can you get a negative amount of snowfall? No, you can't get a negative amount. Or if you're measuring the length of something, can you get a negative measurement of a length? No, you can't. So like things like negative time or negative distance or a decimal answer when the problem asks for integers only, those are what they call extraneous roots or solutions. They're ones that don't make any sense. What you're going to do to those is you are going to cross them out. You're going to reject an answer sometimes. You're going to reject that answer that doesn't make any sense. Like I said, today what we're dealing with are areas of rectangles or squares. You know from probably about 5th grade that the formula for the area of a rectangle or the area of a square is the area equals base times height. Sometimes they use length and width instead, but most of the time for area of a rectangle or square, they use base and height. In these problems today, very important that you're listening to me. In these problems today, you can't just guess and say that you multiply the answers together. They don't allow you to do that. I will not allow you to do that on the homework. I will not allow you to do that on the quiz. They do not allow you to do that on the Regents exam either. Some of them, will you be able to guess what the answer is? Sure. Like if I said that the area of something ended up being 10, right? You could just guess that the base and height were like 5 and 2, right? So you can't just guess at the answer and say, oh, I multiplied them together. You must use the quadratic formula or factoring and then reject one of the answers, and you have to show your work. Just like yesterday on the homework in Class Kick, you have to show your work on the screen. Otherwise, you're not getting any credit, whether that's using the pen tool or using the camera tool and taking a picture of your piece of paper that you did the work on. So again, you can't just guess and leave it like that. So let's take a look at 4 examples. All right, I'm going to do the first 3, and then I'm going to have you try the last one on your own. So take a look at this one. This is a typical problem. It says a goat grazing zone is shaped like a rectangle. Immediately, because it's talking about a rectangle, the first thing that I want to do is draw a rectangle. So goat grazing zone is shaped like a rectangle. The length is 15 feet more than the width. The total area is 700. What are the dimensions? Now, this word screws up people every single year. A dimension is just like the length of a side. So what are the lengths of the side of the rectangle? So the first thing that you need to do is you need to set up what the sides really are. It says that the length is 15 feet more than the width. Does it say anything about the width? No. So that's just going to be X. And then it says that the length is 15 feet more than. More than means plus. So if the width is X, the length is X plus 15. It helps to do that first and write it out, because now you need to make an equation and solve. Sure, could you just start guessing numbers that were 15 apart, like 1 and 16, 2 and 17, and eventually get your answer of what times what equals 700? Yes, you could do that. Will they take that answer on the Regents exam? No, they won't. Will I take that answer on a homework or a test? No, I won't. All right. So what you have to do is you have to set up an equation. The area of a rectangle is you're multiplying the 2 sides together, the length times the width. So what you want to do is you want to do x times x plus 15. We're multiplying the two sides together, and we get 700. So x times x plus 15 equals 700. I want to take and I want to do the distributive property. So we have x squared plus 15x equals 700. Now this looks just like a question from yesterday. Remember, we want to get it set equal to 0 first. So the first thing that I want to do is minus 700 and minus 700. So x squared plus 15x minus 700 equals 0. Remember, I want it set equal to 0, so then I can do the quadratic formula. I could do completing the square, which I wouldn't recommend, or you can use the parentheses and factor. What times what equals negative 700? That adds up to 15. You probably don't know what times what equals negative 700. That adds up to 15. So what I would do is I would do the quadratic formula. Remember, this is your A value. So your A value is 1. Your B value is 15. Your C value is negative 700. So I'm going to do the quadratic formula. So negative B, so negative 15 plus or minus the square root of B squared, so 15 squared, minus 4 times A times C, all over 2A, so 2 times 1. When you go and do this, when you type that into the calculator, you end up with negative 15 plus or minus 15 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 700 is really 3,025. And that's all over 2. 3,025 is a perfect square. When you type in the square root of 3,025, you get 55. So we really have negative 15 plus or minus 55 all over 2. This is where you want to split it into two things. Now, I ran out of room at the bottom of the screen, so I'm going to go back up here, and I'm going to go over here. So I have negative 15 plus 55 over 2, and I have negative 15 minus 55 all over 2. Negative 15 plus 55 is 40. 40 divided by 2 is 20. On this side, negative 55 minus, or sorry, negative 15 minus 55 is negative 70. Negative 70 divided by 2 is negative 35. Now, pay very close attention because this is what the whole point of the lesson is today. Can I have a negative length? Can this side of the rectangle be a negative value? No, it can't. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You can't have a negative length of a side. So that answer does not make any sense. So what you're going to do is you're going to cross that answer out, and you're going to say that you are going to reject it. You do need to do this on the Regents exam. You're going to reject the negative length. All right. You're going to reject the negative answer. So that answer doesn't make any sense, but this one does. So now you want to take this one and sub it back in to both of those x's. So the width of the rectangle is 20. And then we sub a 20 into here. So 20 plus 15 gives you 35 for the length. So we have the width of 20, the length of 35. We rejected our negative answer. This is what you're going to do on every single question today. Take a look at the next one. So this next one says a rectangular home is 1,200 feet squared. The length is 10 more than the width. So does it say anything about the width? No. That means my width is x. The length is 10 more than that. So x plus 10. So the area is 1,200. So for my equation, I'm going to do x times x plus 10. The length times the width equals 1,200. Distribute, distribute. So I have x squared plus 10x equals 1200. Now, I don't want it equal to 1200. I want it equal to 0. So to get it equal to 0, I'm going to do minus 1200 and minus 1200. That way, I have x squared plus 10x minus 1200 equals 0. Now, I could do completing the square. I could do the quadratic formula, or I could do what times what equals negative 1200. That adds up to 10. Again, I think the easiest thing to do here is the quadratic formula. Your A value is 1, your B value is 10, and your C value is negative 1200. So when you go to do the quadratic formula, you're going to have negative B plus or minus B squared minus 4AC. So B squared is 10 squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A, 2 times 1. So I have negative 10 plus or minus. When you type that stuff into the calculator, you end up with 4,900 inside the square root all over 2. That is a perfect square. That is really 70. So I have negative 10 plus or minus 70 all over 2. This is where you're going to split it into 2. I have negative 10 plus 70 over 2 and negative 10 minus 70 all over 2. Negative 10 plus 70 is 60. 60 divided by 2 gives you 30. On this side, I have negative 10 minus 70, which is negative 80, divided by 2 is negative 40. Can I have a negative length of a side of a rectangle? No. So we're going to cross that answer out and write the words reject the negative, because that's an impossible measurement. That's an impossible answer. I'm going to take my 30, sub it in for x, and sub it in for x. So the width of the rectangle is 30, because that's just x. And then the length is 30 plus 10, which gives me 40. So I have 30 and I have 40. Now, sometimes they're going to try and confuse you with a square. Squares are actually easier, all right? Squares are actually easier. So if we have a square yard has an area of 1,500. How long is each side of the square? Now, what you have to remember about squares is that if one side is x, the other side is also x, because all the sides of a square are all the same. So if I go to multiply these two things together, base times height or length times width, I'm going to have x times x equals 1,500. X times x is just x squared. Well, think about how you solve something like this from the last chapter. The way that you solve something like this is, since you have x squared equals a number, you're just going to take the square root and take the square root. Now, 1,500 is not a perfect square. I'm going to round, all right? When we take the square root, we get x equals. When you take the square root of a number, you're going to get plus or minus. And I'm just going to call it 38.729. I'm going to round. So can we have these two answers? Remember, by writing the plus or minus, you're really saying that you have 38.729 and negative 38.729. Can I have a negative measurement? No, I can't. I can't have that negative side. So I'm going to reject the negative answer. So my answer is 38.729 and 38.729. Just pay attention to what they're telling you to round your answer to. So take a look at this last one. Go ahead and try this last one on your own, please. Now, with this one, it says that you have a square again. So let's draw a square. And it says that there are 2 1-foot leaves that extend the table length extend the length of a table. If the area of a table is extended is 15, what are the dimensions? Now, if you don't know what a leaf of a table is, all right, when normally you have a table, think about Thanksgiving, all right, you normally have a rectangular table. What happens in a leaf of a table is these 2 sides get pulled out, all right, these 2 sides get pulled out and they add pieces to the middle of the table, all right, to make it longer. So what we're really looking at here is this part is staying the same, all right, but then we're pulling it out and adding 2 1-foot sections. So we're adding 2 feet to that. So does that square not become a square anymore? Yeah, that square becomes, when we add 2 1-foot sections to it, that square actually becomes a rectangle, all right? So go ahead and solve the rest of this one on its own. I wanted to help you set it up, all right? Go ahead and try this one, please. You want to multiply the 2 sides together and it equals 15. So getting you started on this one, again, you want to multiply the 2 sides of the rectangle together. So you want to do x times x plus 2. We have to distribute. So you have x squared plus 2x equals 15. Remember, we never want it equal to 15. We want it equal to 0. So you have to do minus 15 and minus 15. So you have x squared plus 2x minus 15 equals 0. Now, this is one of them that you might do it differently. You might not use the quadratic formula on this one because this one has a little bit lower of numbers. You might be able to figure out, or you should be able to figure out, what times what equals negative 15 that adds up to positive 2. So if you want to use factoring on this one, you could. It would be a plus 5 and a minus 3. If you wanted to do it the factoring way, then we would draw a line down the middle, set both sides equal to 0, and solve. So minus 5 minus 5, we would get x equals negative 5. And then we would have plus 3 plus 3. And we would have x equals 3. That is one way that you could do it. Why didn't I do it this way on the other ones? Because the numbers were huge. It would take a lot of brain power to figure out what went in the parentheses. The other way that you could do this is using the quadratic formula. You can use the quadratic formula on every single one. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So we have negative 2 plus or minus the square root. When you type that in, you would have 4 minus 60. 4 plus 60. Sorry, 4 plus 60, which is 64, all over 2. Square root of 64 is 8. That is a perfect square. So here's where you would split it. We would have negative 2 plus 8 divided by 2 and negative 2 minus 8 divided by 2. This would be 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. This would be negative 10 divided by 2, which is negative 5. Notice that we got the same exact answers. No matter which way you do it, you want to reject the negative answer because we can't have a negative length of a side. So now we want to plug in our 3 and plug in our 3. So our width is 3 and our length is 5. Again, you might have been able to figure that out just in your head, but remember what I said at the beginning, please. You have to show your work. Yes, you can figure out some of them in your head. You can't just guess and say that you multiplied the numbers together. On your homework today, on your quiz, on your Regents exam, they expect you to show setting up a quadratic. The directions would actually say, using quadratics, solve for blah, blah, blah. And if you just randomly guess 2 numbers together, you will not get credit for that. And it would be a shame to lose like 10 points on your Regents exam because of that.